Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're strapping on our helmets, grabbing our metaphorical longships, and heading straight into the chilling, compelling world of Norse mythology.
And this isn't just going to be a simple retelling of old tales.
No, not at all. We are treating this material as a serious archaeological and literary detective mission. We've cracked open a stack of sources, especially the insights from a modern master reteller, to really figure out why these stories, these tales of frosty landscapes and doomed gods, why they still feel so intensely present, so current.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is really specific. We're trying to synthesize the unique appeal, the, complicated, fragmented history, and the often misrepresented true nature of the Norse pantheon.
We want to give you those aha moments.
Exactly. Those moments that reveal precisely what makes this particular mythology stand out from, say, the cleaner, maybe more predictable cycles of the Greek or Roman world. This is your shortcut to understanding the intellectual and the emotional texture of the Norse worldview.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're starting with a massive realization, and it's drawn directly from the source material itself. It compares trying to pick a favorite mythology to try and pick a favorite style of cooking.
Which is such a strain, but, a perfect analogy.
It really is.
What's fascinating here is that initial comparison. The source suggests that sometimes you want the refined complexity of Thai food, but other times you just crave the visceral satisfaction of plain home cooking.
And Norse myths are the home cooking.
In their own cold, brutal, and beautiful way, yes, they fulfill that craving for something raw, elemental, and yet deeply profound. And if you have to declare a favorite, as the reteller does, the Norse myths often win. And it's because they are structured around one massive, inescapable truth that casts this huge shadow over every single story.
And that truth, that central pivot, is Ragnarok.
The twilight of the gods, the ultimate end of the cycle. This is the moment where the Norse tradition just fundamentally differentiates itself from the classic Greek or Roman systems.
Where the gods are basically immortal, right? They just go on forever.
It's eternal. They'll reign forever. But the Æsir and Vanir, the gods of Asgard, they are deeply aware that they have a definitive, scheduled expiration date. They know, in excruciating detail, exactly how they are going to fall.
But wait, isn't the world ending in other myths too? I mean, doesn't the Greek cycle have massive apocalyptic battles like the war with the Titans? What makes Ragnarok so fundamentally different and, tragic?
That's a great question because on the surface they seem similar, but the difference is the finality and the knowledge of that finality.
Okay.
The Titanomachy was a war for supremacy. It was about who gets to rule Olympus. But Ragnarok, it's a shared death sentence. The gods are going to battle the frost giants, the fire giants led by Surtur, the terrifying children of Loki, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world serpent, and they're all going to die.
Not just the villains.
Not just the villains, the heroes too. Odin is swallowed by Fenrir. Thor slays Jormungandr, but is poisoned by its venom and falls after just 9 paces. Freya, Tyr, Heimdall, they all meet their destined match. The destruction it's total.
So this concept, the world ending in fire and ice, and then being, tentatively reborn, it fundamentally changes the whole dynamic. It strips away that simple concept of divine permanence and replaces it with this profound, unavoidable tragedy.
They're fighting a battle they know they cannot win.
Wow.
Precisely. The sheer fatalism of the Norse cosmos is the engine of the entire mythology. It transforms every single figure, every god, every giant into a tragic figure. Their eventual fate is sealed. It's written in the prophecies.
Which makes their actions in the present, their desperate attempts to avoid or delay fate, so much more powerful.
It resonates so much more powerfully. It's that inherent urgency that makes this world linger. It gives it a strange sense of immediacy, a feeling that these stories are somehow more current than systems of belief that feel, comfortably rooted in the ancient past. The Norse gods are running out of time.
And you, the listener, feel that clock ticking every time they make a decision.
Every single time.
And speaking of the setting, that fatalism is clearly forged in the lore of a truly chilly place. This is not a sun-drenched, wine-soaked Mediterranean mythology we're talking about.
Oh, not at all. The geography is absolute key to understanding the cultural mindset. These are myths forged in lands defined by extremes. Long, long winter nights that seem to go on forever.
Contrasted with the unending, almost unsettling daylight of midsummer.
Exactly. Think about how that duality of extreme darkness, which suggests chaotic forces and extreme unnatural light would shape a culture's perception of the divine. It's a harsh, unforgiving, cold environment.
And the relationship the people had with their gods reflected that climate. It was less about comfort.
And much more about survival.
The source brings up a fascinating, almost subversive point here. It suggests that the people who originally told these stories didn't necessarily like their gods.
Right. Even though they profoundly respected and feared them.
That's a critical psychological distinction.
It is. Respect and fear, absolutely. You wouldn't dream of neglecting a sacrifice to Thor because crossing him would mean disaster. But the source suggests a lack of simple, loving trust. Affection, even.
Why is that?
Because the gods themselves are deeply flawed. They're dangerous, and sometimes they are shockingly callous. Odin is brilliant, but entirely self-interested and treacherous. Thor is physically overwhelming, but lacks foresight.
They're like forces of nature.
Terrifying forces of nature and ambition, always operating on a scale that humans can only vaguely grasp, and often resulting in human collateral damage. This complicated, even strained relationship prevents the mythology from ever becoming, saccharine. It retains its grittiness because the divine beings are so morally ambiguous.
Here's where it gets really interesting and connects the ancient world to the contemporary. For so many modern audiences, including the author of our source material, the first introduction to Asgard wasn't from some ancient Icelandic text.
No, it was from an American comic book.
Exactly.
And we have to start there, because the contrast between the pop culture simplification and the original complexity is the whole point of this deep dive. The cultural entry point for generations has been that sanitized, heroic version created in the 1960s. And that version, thanks largely to the brilliance of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, presents a very distinct, polished vision of the Nine Worlds. We get the mighty Thor, powerful, certainly handsome, blonde, hammer-wielding, always fighting for good, and Asgard itself.
It's this breathtaking, towering science-fictional city, right? Full of massive, imposing, gold-plated buildings. It's a cosmic kingdom floating above the Bifrost Bridge.
And the characterizations are similarly streamlined for that kind of heroism. Odin, the Allfather, is typically portrayed as wise, patriarchal, and fundamentally noble.
The gentle, if irascible king.
Right.
And Loki. He's the sardonic, often buffoonish, horn-helmeted creature of pure mischief. It's an easy, reliable dichotomy. Good hero, wise father, and a clearly defined, easily defeated villain. But the moment you dive into the original lore, and the source specifically references foundational works like Myths of the Norsemen by Roger Lancelyn Green to illustrate this shock, you just hit a wall of puzzlement.
Because those clean moral lines immediately dissolve.
Completely.
This contrast is just so central to understanding the true underlying cold tone of the mythology. The comic book version is highly sanitized, it's futuristic, and it's morally simplified. When you look at the primary sources, the reality is so much grittier, darker, and rooted in a non-cosmic terrestrial imagination.
Okay, so let's deconstruct those original identities because they radically shift our understanding. Take Asgard first. We picture a shining city of advanced technology.
It is so far from a futuristic citadel. In the oldest surviving tellings, Asgard is described much more simply. It's essentially a massive Viking hall, Valhalla being the most famous, and a collection of wooden, stone, and turf buildings.
So like a settlement.
A settlement out on the frozen wastes, maybe protected by massive walls. And that image, a remote, cold wooden stone settlement, not a gleaming city, tells you something immediate and important about the values and aesthetics of the people telling the stories.
Their divine home was just an expansion of their own greatest domestic reality.
Yes. Not some abstract futuristic sci-fi world. It was cold, it was functional, and it was constantly under threat.
And Odin undergoes a profound, almost terrifying transformation from the comics.
Yeah.
He's no longer just gentle and noble.
Absolutely not. The original Odin is brilliant, yes. But he is fundamentally unknowable. He's treacherous, and he is deeply, deeply dangerous. The source is so clear that the simplistic, wise old man trope has to be discarded.
So who is he then?
This is the god who sacrifices one of his eyes to Mimir's well for knowledge of the future because he understands that knowledge is worth any price. This is the god who hangs himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and 9 nights, pierced by his own spear, just to obtain the secrets of the runes.
He's constantly scheming.
Constantly, frequently breaking his own oaths and always aware of his impending doom. He is not a comforting figure. He is a complex, terrifying force of ambition, prophecy, and sacrifice who demands respect because he is genuinely ruthless in his pursuit of power and foresight.
I'm guessing the urgency of knowing Ragnarok is coming must drive him to be so ruthlessly pragmatic.
Exactly. That's the key to his character. His goal isn't necessarily to win Ragnarok, he knows he can't, but to understand it, and to gather as many heroes as possible into Valhalla to fight at his side when the time comes.
So every action.
Every single action, even sacrificing his own eye, is a desperate measure to gain a tiny edge against a known, unavoidable cataclysm. That fatalism makes him dangerous even to his allies.
Okay, then there's Thor. He remains immensely strong, and his hammer, Mjolnir, is just as powerful, the ultimate weapon against giants. But the subtlety comes in his intellect.
Right.
The source says quite plainly that he's honestly not the brightest of the gods.
It's a magnificent piece of characterization because it grounds his heroism in something very human. Thor is strength personified, a magnificent protector against the giants, but he often relies exclusively on brute force and is sometimes hilariously easy to trick.
He's not a strategist.
Not at all. He often requires the advice of others, especially Loki, to navigate complex social situations or solve cunning riddles.
Can you give us a quick example of that? Let's call it simple-mindedness in action.
Oh, the best story illustrating this is his journey to the castle of the giant Utgard Loki. It's a classic.
What happens?
Thor attempts to perform these feats that Utgard Loki sets for him, but because of illusion and trickery, he fails spectacularly. He tries to lift a cat that turns out to be Jormungandr, the world serpent, and can only manage to lift one of its paws off the ground.
Which is actually an incredible feat of strength, but he doesn't realize it.
Exactly. He thinks he's failed. Then he tries to wrestle an old woman, only to discover she is old age itself, and the fact that he was only brought to one knee is actually considered a magnificent feat. He is a victim of guile, because his mind only processes direct physical challenges.
He's the straightforward warrior in a world full of cunning metaphysical schemes.
And that vulnerability makes him relatable and, frankly, a lot funnier than his comic counterpart.
And finally, Loki. The source rejects the simple label of evil or pure mischief. That categorization feels like a massive disservice to his role.
It is. Loki is the ultimate complicated figure, the chaotic principle. He is certainly not a force for good. His actions often lead to disaster. And critically, he is the ultimate catalyst for Ragnarok.
Specifically through the murder of Balder.
Right, but for a time, he is tolerated in Asgard because he is often the only one capable of extricating the gods from trouble.
Trouble that he himself usually caused in the first place.
Usually, yeah.
But I have to challenge there a little. If Loki is the one who orchestrates the murder of Balder, the gentle, beloved god whose death precipitates the final spiral toward the end of the world, how can we possibly excuse him as just complicated? Doesn't that risk minimizing the severity of his malice in the original lore?
That raises the essential question, doesn't it? The original Norse worldview didn't operate on a binary of good and evil like later Christian theology did. Loki represents necessary chaos. He is part god, part giant. He embodies the dual nature of the cosmos itself, creation and destruction.
So he's a necessary evil.
I'd say a necessary disruptive force. Yes, he commits horrific acts, Balder's murder being the unforgivable one. But before that, his tricks led to the creation of Mjolnir and the golden hair of Sif. He is simultaneously the architect of the gods' greatest treasures and their ultimate destruction.
So to call him merely evil misses that dynamic tension.
It misses the whole point. He is the necessary disruptive force that challenges the established order of the Aesir. And you have to remember, he is the father of the monsters they will eventually die fighting. That makes him terrifying, not simply an amusing trickster. So the initial contrast is critical. The pop culture version stripped away the complexity, the fatalism, and the moral ambiguity, fundamentally altering the entire point of the mythology.
Exactly.
You need to understand the grittiness to appreciate the genuine tragedy of their existence.
Moving outward from the characters, let's trace where these myths physically spread and how they've left their fingerprint on our contemporary world.
Yeah, the history of the Norse gods is fascinating because it's a history of migration and conflict reflected in the very language and places we see today. The best academic hypothesis is that the root of the Aesir and Vanir worship originated in Germany and then spread north into Scandinavia.
And then, as the Vikings expanded out of the north, the myths traveled right along with them in their long ships.
The Viking Age, beginning roughly in the late 8th century, scattered these stories all across Northern Europe. We see the influence moving into areas like Orkney, Shetland, Iceland, Scotland, Ireland, and profoundly into the north of England.
And this isn't just about vague cultural memory, it's about physical geography.
Right. The invaders literally left places named for their primary deities, Thor and Odin. The landscape became a living memory of their worship, a constant reminder of their presence and their power.
But the most surprising survival and the most common linguistic fingerprint is found right in our weekly calendars. The names of these ancient, chilly gods are embedded in the modern English days of the week.
A survival that most people use every single day without thinking twice.
It's kind of amazing.
It is a subtle, almost invisible survival, but it's profoundly impactful. We say these names every single week without realizing we are speaking Old Norse or Old English interpretations of Norse deity names. It just demonstrates the depth of the cultural fusion that occurred when the Norse met the Anglo-Saxons.
Okay, let's break that down in detail, starting with Tuesday.
Tuesday is named for Tyr, the one-handed god. He's often overlooked in modern retellings, but he was a crucial figure in the lore Odin's son, the god of single combat, law, and heroic glory.
And his association with this day links him to Mars, right? The Roman god of war.
Exactly. Tuesday was originally Dies Martis, the day of Mars. The Anglo-Saxons just substituted their local name for the Germanic war god, Tyr, which is linguistically identical to Tyr.
So Tuesday is the day of law and single combat, even today. Then we move to Wednesday, the day of the All-Father.
Wednesday is Woden's day. Odin. It's a direct linguistic descendant. And it's fitting, that the day at the center of the week belongs to the god at the center of it, the pantheon, the god of wisdom, fury, inspiration, and poetry.
Master of transformation and deception. Very fitting for a day that often marks the midpoint of labor.
I think so.
And the big one, Thursday, which is perhaps the most universally recognizable.
Thursday. This is probably the most obvious translation linking directly back to the thunder god. It equates him with Jupiter or Jove, whose day was Dies Iovis.
The day of thunder.
The day of thunder. Thor is the primary protector of Asgard and Midgard against the giants, and his day is an immediate, powerful connection to strength and protection.
Finally, Friday. We often assume it's for Venus in the Romance languages, but in the Norse context, it's about the queen of the gods.
Friday is named for Frigg, the queen of the gods, Odin's wife. She's associated with marriage, motherhood, and crucially, foreknowledge of destiny, though she never shares what she knows. The Roman day was Venus's day, and the connection between the goddesses of love and domesticity was maintained through Frigg.
It's truly remarkable that these specific figures have their names so permanently etched into the structure of modern life.
Across so many Northern European languages, yeah, it's wild. Now, shifting from these linguistic remnants to the theological structure, we have to address the war and eventual religious truce between the two groups of deities, the Aesir and the Vanir. This conflict and the subsequent integration, it suggests a profound historical or religious event that was then cemented in myth. The lore speaks of a brutal, long war between the two groups of gods, which eventually ended in a truce and an integration of certain key figures.
And this is where the detective work becomes essential, as the source mentions, because the myth is basically recording a real-world cultural clash.
That's the theory.
So what do we know about the Vanir? Based on the surviving traces, what makes them distinct from the warlike Aesir?
Well, they appear to have been nature, fertility, and wealth gods, fundamentally distinct from the often more warlike, political, and philosophical Aesir. The Vanir were skilled in cedar, which is a powerful form of magic associated with prophecy and manipulating destiny,
Which the Aesir saw as less than honorable.
It was often viewed by the Aesir as a feminine or potentially dishonorable practice. The Vanir were also described as being brothers and sisters, which might reflect a different, older, or more localized form of worship focused on the cycles of the earth and the sea.
But they weren't just peaceful nature gods.
No. The source cautions that they were perhaps no less dangerous than the Aesir. Nature gods, after all, can be unpredictable, demanding, and overwhelming.
So the Aesir specialized in things like governance, war, and poetic inspiration, whereas the Vanir held the keys to fertility, harvest, wealth, and this deep-seated magic.
Precisely. And the Aesir needed the Vanir's expertise. I mean, imagine the Aesir are the conquering political class, and the Vanir are the indigenous keepers of the land's secrets. You can win the war, but if you don't know how to guarantee the harvest or ensure fertility, your empire will starve.
And the hypothesis for this mythological war and truce links directly back to human political and cultural conflict.
It's a strong and workable hypothesis among scholars. It suggests that there were tribes that worshipped the Vanir and separate tribes that worshipped the Aesir. When the Aesir worshippers invaded or migrated into the lands of the Vanir worshippers, perhaps from the south, they didn't just annihilate the existing religion.
They compromised.
They made compromises and accommodations, realizing the cultural and agricultural necessity of the Vanir deities.
And we see the physical proof of that integration, the terms of the treaty enshrined in Asgard itself.
Exactly. Gods of the Vanir, specifically the sister and brother, Freya and Frey, live in Asgard alongside the Aesir as hostages, or, peace envoys. Freya, the goddess of love, war, and satyr, and Frey, the god of peace, wealth, and fertility.
So their cohabitation is the mythological record of that historical truce.
It demonstrates the blending of two distinct religious systems. It shows how history, religion, and myth combine to give us crucial clues about ancient societal power dynamics and the necessity of cultural compromise.
The challenge for anyone trying to fully appreciate Norse mythology is realizing how little actually survived. We're now diving into the fragmented lore, the mystery of the missing stories. The scale of the loss is genuinely staggering. The source uses this brilliant, terrifying analogy. It's as if from all of Greek and Roman myth, the only tales of the gods that had survived was the deeds of Theseus and Hercules. Wow, just imagine that. The sheer volume of stories about Zeus's rule, Hera's jealousy, Poseidon's rage, and thousands of other minor deities. Just gone.
That's the reality for Norse myth. We have fragments, folktales, heroic poems, and prose accounts, but so much more has just evaporated into the cold northern air.
And the surviving material, primarily the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, came to us under highly specific and rather ironic conditions. They weren't written down by fervent worshippers.
No, they were written down 2 centuries after Christianity had already displaced the worship of the Norse gods in the major power centers, which means the texts we rely on were compiled by people who were likely already Christians, or at least operating within a Christianized worldview.
That creates an immediate filter, a bias on the material.
It does. It potentially softens the most brutal pagan elements or tries to frame the gods as mere ancient kings.
But why preserve them at all if the religion was gone? Why would Christian scribes bother with pagan stories? That's the crux of the preservation mystery.
The preservation was largely practical, aesthetic, and professional rather than purely religious. People, specifically poets in Iceland, were deeply concerned that if the stories were not preserved, a key literary device called kennings would become meaningless.
And the entire art of traditional poetry would collapse.
It would. The source emphasizes this was a major practical driver for recording these ancient narratives.
Okay, so let's define a kenning for the listener in detail because it's such a specific and beautiful cultural marker.
A kenning is essentially a poetic, ornamental, compound expression used in Old Norse and Old English poetry. Instead of saying blood, you might say battle sweat. Instead of saying ship, you might say seahorse or wave steed.
They're ornate metaphors that rely entirely on shared cultural and mythological knowledge for their meaning.
Completely.
And these kennings often refer directly to specific, deep mythological events. So losing the stories would cause a literary crisis. If we'd lost the story of Thor, what complex, beautiful kenning would we never understand? Well, if we had lost the story of Thor fighting the world serpent, we might have lost the kenning rope of Midgard for Jormungandr. The source provides a fantastic example related to Freya. Freya's tears was a common poetic way of saying gold. Yeah, I freeze. And if you didn't know the story of Freya weeping tears of red gold while searching for her lost husband,
that poetic usage means nothing. The line is just confusing, not beautiful. Therefore, the stories had to be recorded not primarily to save the religion, but to save the poetry, to keep the intellectual tradition alive. It's a stunning example of linguistic necessity driving historical preservation. This brings us directly to the most important figure in this entire preservation effort, Snorri Sturluson. We can't talk about fragmentation without talking about him, absolutely. Snorri is our most vital single source for Norse mythology. He was an Icelandic chieftain, poet, and historian writing in the 13th century, but it's crucial that you understand his motivation. He wasn't trying to revive paganism.
he was writing a handbook for Christian poets.
Exactly. His prose Edda explains the rules of poetry and provides the mythological references required to understand and properly use kennings. He essentially provided the key to the literary tradition, but he did it by framing the gods in a euhemeristic way.
Meaning he described them not as divine beings, but as powerful, ancient human kings or heroes.
Right, so that the stories could be told within a Christian world without being seen as heretical.
So he was sanitizing the gods, recasting Odin or Thor as great human rulers of the past, so the stories could be enjoyed without promoting pagan idolatry. But this by necessity, dilutes the divine, truly mythological context.
It's a magnificent act of cultural preservation achieved through narrative compromise. He gave us the backbone of the lore, but we must always read it with the understanding that it passed through his editorial filter, designed to be palatable to his contemporary Christian audience.
And the deepest tragedy of this fragmentation, and one the source expresses a profound lament about, is the loss of the goddesses' narratives.
This is the great dark hole in our understanding. We know their names and we know some of their attributes and powers, but the full, rich tales, the myths, the associated rituals, all are either lost, buried, or simply forgotten.
We have names and functions, but no dynamic narratives.
And that leaves a massive hole in our understanding of the Norse worldview, particularly concerning the female roles in domesticity, healing, wisdom, and prophecy.
The source lists some specific figures we know are missing. What would those stories have given us?
Well, we know of Aer, who was the doctor of the gods. Imagine the stories of healing, herbalism, and arcane medical knowledge we have lost. Those would tell us about Norse practices around health and suffering.
And Lofn.
Lofn, the comforter, who was also a goddess of marriages. Her tales would have detailed ritual, proper conduct, and relationship dynamics in ancient Norse society. We also have Stolfn, a goddess of love, whose narratives would have provided Norse perspectives on attraction and romance. Probably a complex perspective, distinct from the Roman Venus or Greek Aphrodite.
And finally, Vor, the goddess of wisdom. That seems redundant, though, given Odin's obsession with knowledge.
It might seem redundant, but to have a goddess specifically dedicated to wisdom alongside the figure of Odin tells you how central that concept was to their culture. Perhaps she represented a different kind of wisdom, not Odin's frantic, manipulative prophecy, but calm, domestic, or practical wisdom.
But without her tales, we only have the barest outline.
We know they existed, we know their functions, but the entire body of mythological narrative and perhaps the associated rituals have simply vanished. This is why anyone approaching the material today must recognize that they are working with beautiful, powerful, yet profoundly incomplete puzzle pieces.
Which brings us directly to the craft of retelling the creative challenge involved in synthesizing this fragmented, contradictory, and incomplete lore for a modern audience.
The retailer's job is so difficult precisely because, as the source acknowledges, details within the surviving stories, even between Snorri's text and the older poems, often contradict each other. The goal isn't just to list the existing facts, which would be dry and technical.
It's to paint a cohesive, immersive picture of a world and a time.
Right, and this requires an enormous degree of synthesis, informed speculation, and critical editing.
It means the writer has to achieve complete imaginative immersion, placing themselves in that original environment.
They have to imagine themselves back in that cold land, maybe during those endless winter nights under the hypnotic glow of the northern lights, or during the long, unending daylight of midsummer, trying to make sense of the cosmos. They're asking the same questions the original audience must have asked.
What else did Thor do on that journey to the giants? Or how do we live our lives knowing doomsday is coming? And the source provides a wonderfully grounded, almost amusing example of a question that anchors the mythology in the everyday concerns of the time. Where does bad poetry come from? That is fascinating. Even the creation of something like poor verse has a divine origin story. But the source outlines a very specific scholarly method for this retelling process. It wasn't about relying on modern interpretations.
This is key to the credibility of the modern retelling. The author specifically avoided going back to beloved modern tellers like Roger Lanson Green or Kevin Crossley Holland to prevent those modern, often softened interpretations from coloring the new narrative.
The only way to find the original grit and ambiguity was to go back to the roots. The true, difficult roots. Many different translations of Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda and the raw verses of the Poetic Edda. These are texts dating back 900 years and before, often with abrupt shifts, missing segments, and stylistic difficulties.
So this required spending time with multiple translations, cross-referencing names, picking and choosing the most mythologically robust version of a tale, and then deciding on the most effective narrative structure. This method emphasizes the deep dive into the primary materials rather than relying on secondary, perhaps already simplified, interpretations.
And this leads to the necessity of hybridity in storytelling. You often can't tell a single, complete, coherent myth using only one source because of the fragmentation Snorri dealt with. The retelling process is therefore an explicit, necessary blending of versions from the prose and the poems. The source gives a perfect example of this narrative synthesis. Thor's famous visit to the giant Hymir to retrieve a massive cauldron. I know this one.
The version told in the source material is a hybrid. It begins using the narrative structure found in the Poetic Edda, providing the core dramatic framework. But then the reteller adds specific, necessary details, like Thor's dramatic fishing adventure where he grapples with Jormungandr.
Which come from Snorri's prose Edda version.
Exactly.
So the final product is not a direct translation of one text, which would leave the story incomplete, but a carefully constructed, editorially sound narrative that respects the primary sources while ensuring the story is coherent and complete for the modern listener.
It is an exercise in critical literary editing. It requires continuous consultation of highly specialized reference material. The source mentions the constant reliance on A Dictionary of Northern Mythology by Rudolf Simic. That level of cross-referencing is essential.
Also essential.
Because, due to the fragmentation, any single name, location, or magical object might have slightly different attributes or spellings across different surviving documents. The dictionary ensures the creative narrative choices remain grounded in established, verifiable lore and don't stray into unsupported speculation.
Looking at the sequence of the myths as a whole, the author found that the complete collection felt like a defined, powerful journey.
It provides a definitive cosmological arc, and this ties back to our very first point. The journey begins in the mythological chaos of the ice and fire that the universe begins in, the primordial Ginnunga Gap flanked by Niflheim and Muspelheim, and it concludes exactly where we started our discussion, the catastrophic fire and the ice that end the world. Ragnarok, where the flames of Surtur destroy existence. That defined beginning, middle, and inevitable end lends a powerful sense of completeness despite the textual fragmentation.
Along this journey, we meet the familiar faces we've already discussed: Loki, Thor, Odin, but the depth of the deep dive also pulls forward figures that often stand in the shadows, but are crucial to the wider narrative. And this is where the joy of mythological discovery truly lies. The source highlights a figure that deserves much more attention. Angrboda. Tell us more about Angrboda. She sounds like a fester of pure destiny.
She is indeed. Angrboda, whose name translates roughly to she who offers sorrow, is Loki's wife among the giants, residing in Jotunheim. She is a terrifying and pivotal figure who gives birth to his 3 monstrous children.
Ones who bring about Ragnarok.
The very ones. Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world serpent, and Hel, the ruler of the dead. These 3 children are explicitly captured by the gods because they are known to be the primary agents of Ragnarok.
And what makes her so intriguing for the source?
It's her lasting, subtle presence. She appears even in ghost form after Baldur, the good god, is slain.
So she is the mother of all the world's major destroyers and the wife of the ultimate chaos agent. She is truly a nexus point of fate.
Exactly. She represents the irreversible forces of chaos and destruction that are constantly waiting outside the walls of Asgard. Even if we don't have long, continuous narratives solely about her, the mere fact that she bore the instruments of the gods' destruction, all of whom were born before the destruction itself, demonstrates the sheer fatalism of the Norse cosmos.
These peripheral, powerful figures are essential for understanding the full, tragic scope of the Norse narrative.
Absolutely.
That structural journey, from cosmic ice to cosmic fire, and the inevitable role of figures like Angrboda really encapsulates the entire worldview, the beauty, the tragedy, and the inescapable fate.
It's a closed, cyclical loop, and the characters within it are terrifyingly aware of that. It elevates the entire mythology beyond simple tales of heroes and villains.
So let's bring this deep dive home and synthesize what you, the listener, now know. We started by contrasting the simplified, powerful image of pop culture Thor with the gritty, unknowable, and dangerous reality of the original lore.
We established that the unique appeal of Norse myth comes from Ragnarok, that concept of tragic, doomed deities and the cold, harsh climate that birthed these tales. We've traced their history across continents and into our very language.
Seeing the persistent linguistic fingerprints of Tyr, Odin, Thor, and Frigg on our calendar.
Right.
And we've understood the profound difficulty in accessing these stories, the sheer loss of the goddesses' tales, the necessity of Snorri Sturluson's academic intervention, the function of the kennings to save the poetry.
And the rigorous academic labor required to synthesize coherent narratives from fragmented prose and older poems.
The knowledge gained is context.
It is. It's understanding that when you read a Norse myth today, you are reading a highly curated, reconstructed narrative that reflects millennia of cultural conflict, religious compromise, and editorial ingenuity. It's not a simple story. It's a living piece of historical detective work. You are now armed with the knowledge of what's been lost and why.
So what does this all mean for you? You now have this shortcut to Asgard and the knowledge of its fragmented history.
The ultimate takeaway, which the source material emphasizes so strongly, is that the joy of myths doesn't stop when you finish reading them. The fun, the true continuation of the tradition, comes in telling them yourself.
This knowledge isn't meant to be static.
It is meant to be shared.
It becomes yours to wield, yours to share, yours to continue. You are now a carrier of this tradition.
Exactly. You now understand the complexity, the fate, and the true character of these figures. Odin's danger, Thor's simplicity, Loki's necessary chaos. The effort required to reconstruct these tales means you have a responsibility to pass on the knowledge you've gained. And here's your final challenge, the provocative thought to carry with you. On some dark and icy winter's evening, when the nights are long and the sense of the world's edge feels strangely near, don't just recall the facts, use them. Tell the stories.
Tell your friends what actually happened when Thor's hammer was stolen and he had to dress as a bride, or describe the brilliant, treacherous way Odin obtained the mead of poetry for the gods. By retelling those complex, gritty tales, you are not just telling a story, you are actively preserving an entire intellectual tradition that nearly vanished.
Go forth and tell the stories.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.